So, this guy you're about to hear from also, I think, represents us in a lot of ways. He went on this show called Alone. You guys heard about that show? It's where people go out alone and they stay alone until they're not alone anymore. He was alone longer than anyone. And I remember last year we did this, and he was hanging around backstage. We were out here at Fort Missoula in the park, and he was hanging around backstage. And somebody was whispering to me, like, Clay Hayes is back here. He's on Alone. It debuts tomorrow. We got a sneak peek. And we were asking him, like, how much do you win if you won? How much money is $500,000 if you win the show Alone? So we were like looking to see what truck he bought. Because he's like, I can't tell you yet. It hasn't aired. I'm under the NDA. So we were looking in his truck to see if there's a briefcase in there full of money, looking in there to see if he got new rims, but nothing. Then come to find out, a couple months later, he did win. Round of applause. So as hunters and outdoorsmen and backcountry hunters and anglers, we had an Olympian and a dude that was alone on TV. We had both those things. So now, we're going to hear about all the things Clay wants to tell us. Please give a round of applause. Clay Hayes.
All right, so this song, this is Ray Stevens. Who in here knows Ray Stevens? Y'all my folks right there. I know there's some Southern folks in here. So this song has special significance to this story because this is about a streaker, and my story in kind of a roundabout way is about a streaker. So before I get started, I want to just go on record here for a scientific discovery that I've recently made. I believe that I have found the missing genetic link between the fool hen and a superior race of genius super grouse. Now, let me qualify this for you. So here recently, I got the opportunity to spend a couple months living on this large wilderness lake up in British Columbia. And this lake in particular was very windy. And so it was a long glacial valley, and so when the wind came over those glaciers, it super cooled, went down into this narrow valley, and it ripped up through this thing. And so most nights when I went to sleep, that's pretty much all you could hear was the wind and the waves off the lake as they crashed against the lakeshore. But every now and then the wind would lay down just enough so that you could hear something other than it. I heard footsteps outside my shelter. I heard rustling in the treetops, and I heard strange calls that I'd never heard before. Well, the footsteps turned out to be moose and grizzlies right outside my shelter. The rustling turned out to be pine marten, and the strange calls, a northern flying squirrel. But every time the wind would lay down, I'd hear something else, something that I thought was even stranger. It was not squat. You know what it may have been. Strange, not because I was unfamiliar with this sound. I'd heard this thing many, many times, but because it was so out of place. In the fall of the year, in the middle of the night, a rough grouse was drumming. Now, I know most of y'all folks in here are going to be familiar with the habits of grouse, but for those of you who are not, let me just say that this is somewhat peculiar behavior. You see, drumming is a springtime thing. It's part of a courtship display where a male rough grouse picks out a prominent log or a stump, and he jumps up there and he beats his wings on his chest. And I've only ever heard it in the springtime and during the middle of the day. And so hearing it in the fall is a little bit strange, but hearing it in the middle of the night, well, that's just downright odd. Now, I guess it was probably about a week or so after I got dropped off on this lake. I was sitting around my camp, staring into the dying embers of my campfire like we all have done, contemplating the twists and turns in life that it put me at that spot, that particular time. When out of nowhere, this grouse comes strutting through the middle of my camp. His tail feathers were all spread out, his neck patches were all puffed up, his crest was up high, and he wasn't 10 feet from me. Now at this point, I hadn't eaten anything for about 3 or 4 days, so I was pretty hungry. And this grouse come by, and he was taunting me. He was daring me. Now, personally, I found this to be a pretty egregious affront, especially considering that I'm such a well-known and respected trad bow hunter, and my recurve was sitting right there. But this grouse had no concern with that, none whatsoever. He didn't give a damn. And apparently for pretty good reason, because just a minute later I sent an arrow right over the top of this grouse. Well, he left with a good education, and I left with nothing. And so it went on like this, and on, drumming in the middle of the night, and the occasional daring shriek through the middle of camp with utter disregard for my prowess as a slayer of game. Now, I have a theory about this grouse. And this is where that genetic link comes in. You see, in biology, there's this thing called the handicap hypothesis. Some of you probably know what this is. So it tries to explain how male birds of various species have developed this audacious plumage and sometimes behavior. You think of a peacock, for example, or a drake wood duck, or the springtime gobbling and strutting and drumming of a wild turkey. Now, if you're a prey species that damn near everything in the woods wants to eat, this doesn't sound like a very prudent survival strategy to me. So what the hell is going on with these birds? Why are they doing this? So the handicap hypothesis puts it this way. It says that these birds are using these things, these handicaps, this vibrant plumage and this seemingly retarded behavior, to signal to others their biological fitness, how good they are at surviving and therefore passing on their genes. So basically what these birds are saying is, hey, if I can survive despite wearing all this audacious plumage and acting like a dumbass, I must be a pretty good survivor, therefore you ought to come mate with me. Well, that makes sense. I mean, the females are picking out the prettiest males that act the dumbest. Turns out that translates pretty doggone good to teenage humans as well. Now, my theory on this particular grouse, this night drummer, is that this bird was just upping the ante a little bit on this handicap hypothesis. You see, jumping up on a stump and drumming in springtime wasn't enough for this bird. No, he wasn't having none of that. He thought, or I think that he thought, that he could set all the lady grouse aflutter if he could just outwit the owls with a little nighttime drumming and make a damn fool of a hungry grouse hunter by streaking through the middle of his camp. And so that is my story about my unwilling participation in the evolution of a strain of super grouse. You see, I like to think that this bird is still out there, and having proven his fitness by his audacity, spread his genes far and wide. And so if you are ever sitting at a campfire in British Columbia and you hear a nighttime drumming or see a crazy grouse streak through the middle of camp, don't confuse that with the foolish behavior of a fool hen, but know that this is the calculated strategy of a superior strain of super grouse looking to swoon all the ladies. That's all I got. Thank you very much.